in that realm except for my mother-in-law. And so, having her be able to provide for me the security and the truth at that moment that I needed was really great and really powerful. And then since then, I feel like it has encouraged me to build a community around me.
Hello and welcome to Healing Trauma Mamas. I'm your host, Madon Wingo. Thank you for joining us as we share in our stories and experiences of healing from childhood traumas and birth traumas. Listen as we discuss our struggles, our failures, our strengths and our victories, and all those lessons we've learned along the way. Why, hello, Healing Trauma Mamas. Welcome back to the podcast today. Very excited to get to end this beautiful day that I've got to share today with people with a conversation with Sammie King. She's joining us today on the podcast. And Sammie, I've really been looking forward to this conversation, and I'm just so blessed that we get to have it tonight. So would you mind introducing yourself to the listeners for just a moment?
Sure. Oh, yeah. So my name's Sammie King. I live in Abilene and I have 4 kiddos. Fortunately, I was able to have all of them at home, and I since then have gone and been certified to teach birth education, and then I do some doula work here and there as I can, with 4 kids. um, and then, other than that, just homeschooling, mom and wife, and all that good stuff. So I'm
All the
really
things.
excited to have this conversation too. Yeah.
Yeah, we were just
I
talking
always
about.
enjoy to talk to you.
Oh, we always have a blast when we talk. And I was just we were just talking before we were hit record that just how, full both of our days were, because we both have quite a few
Yeah.
children between the two of us and wearing lots of hats and lots of things going on. And we obviously both have a heart for birth work and women. And so, yeah, the Lord's keeping us going a lot and ministering, I would say.
Yes.
What we're doing to our children and our husbands and our friends and all of our clients and all the things. So it is neat that you have a different, little different perspective to get to bring. I say a little different, probably a lot different perspective to
Yeah.
bring to the table that, your experiences with your own births. And then I've actually never taught childbirth education. I do it, like one-on-one with clients, but not as a class. And not all, as a group or as an educational program, which you do. And I know you have an excellent one that you do, and it's really great. And then we do share that we both have been doulas before. And so
Yeah.
that type of work obviously is, we both love, taking care of women and being with them and supporting them through pregnancy and childbirth and postpartum. So I'd love to dive in. I'm not sure if you'd like to start first off, maybe with some of your own births, if you want to discuss them at all, or diving into, how you got called into this work. And what do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah, that's great. I'll kind of just start off with um kind of I joke and tell everyone that my husband and I are the opposite of everyone that I ever talk to. It's always the moms and the wives that are like, I really want a home birth. I really want a home birth. And the husbands are the ones that are kind of like, oh, I don't know. That there's probably a lot of cleanup involved. And they're more so the ones that are a little uncomfortable, or I guess like the ones that need a little bit more of reassuring and convincing. Um, we were the opposite. When I first got pregnant, we had only been married for about 2 months. And I knew that, he had a large family and that a bunch of them were born at home. And that's, that kind of was his desire, was to have that for his family too, just because he knew the benefits of it. And he's very hands-on and wanted to be involved. And so he said, well, what do you think about a home birth? And I was like, maybe the first one we'll do in the hospital. And then if it goes well after that, we'll do home births. So at the time, there was only one midwife here in Abilene. And I met with her, fell in love with her, and I was like, yeah, this is what we're gonna do. And so I just ended up being like really fortunate in that. And then I'm very much so, I don't like I love experiences. I don't tend to be the most secure in new experiences because I don't have, you know, I'd never gone through labor before. I had no idea what any of that was. So my midwife, kind of like how you do, had educated me a little bit on some stuff. And she was like, we can go further in depth with whatever you want. And I had seen a pamphlet on her thing for a birth education class. And I was like, I feel like maybe this is the route that I need to go. It was a 10-week series at the time. Oh my gosh, so much information. And I was really grateful for that. And I ended up doing that. Esther and I ended up doing that together. And I learned so much. And I really do not feel like, I feel like had I not done that and educated myself with my first, I don't think it would have been as smooth sailing as it was. Because I had a fantastic first birth. It was 13 hours long, start to finish. I slept for like 4 hours of it. I ate. I had to drive around town to pick my husband up from work because I ignored all the early signs of labor and dropped him off at work that morning because I woke up early with all this energy and, took him to work. And then once I realized I was in labor, I called him. I was like, I have to come pick you up. Someone has to drive you back home. So I had a really great first birth and, you know, I was super fortunate, but I felt like I had a lot of control in that because I knew what was going on. I felt really educated. I was super supported. I had a really great midwife. I had my doula. I had um, my mom and my sister were here, and they were super great. They were so helpful, very calming. And then even though my mom was, so nervous, she still was, very calming, willing to help with whatever she needed to help with. And then my mother-in-law, on top of that, she had she had 9 natural births, but 5 of them I think were at home. And she was there. And so there was a lot of things in that birth that actually played out where I was so grateful that she was there. Because after I had my oldest, I started getting from the tub to the couch. I bled quite a bit and they had no clue if I had torn or whatever. So they were trying to figure out why I was bleeding so much. And um she just really reassured me of like, I don't feel like it was that much blood. Like I think that you're doing okay. And also like reassuring my mom, like, oh yeah, she's good, she's fine. And that was really helpful. And then afterwards, when they were checking to see, if I had torn or whatever, it had ended up being the next day, and I was just dreading if I were going to have to get stitches the following day after having a baby. And and so she actually came into my room with me with my midwife whenever she had checked me, and she reassured me because my midwife was like, "Oh no, it's just minor. You don't really need stitches." And my mother-in-law had told me like, you're fine without stitches. So both of them, like just having all of that there with me for that first experience was really, really helpful and reassuring. Um, and then with my second, it was like an, easy breezy. I did a refresher course for birth education. Some hiccups here and there as far as, my birth team and who was, um, and who was going to be there and stuff. Um, but like the Lord worked everything out perfectly. Again, felt super supported, really educated. Her birth was, oh gosh, I mean, maybe 4 hours total, and it was fantastic, really amazing. Honestly, probably my best, most favorite one. It was so easy, so smooth, just so calm and peaceful. And then we came up to my third, and at the time of having my third, we were remodeling our house, so we actually didn't have a wall that went into like our whole living room, kitchen area, and that's typically where I birth. We had construction people here all the time. It was just really, my
Sounds
husband at the time was, at the time my husband was working so much. Like, I mean, it wasn't uncommon for me to just not see him. And then my brother-in-law was living here for a while. Well, I think he moved in maybe like 2 weeks before I gave birth. And so he was living here. And so it just was it was very stressful. And I remember thinking, okay, I can do 13 hours. If my labor is 13 hours, I can do that because I've done that before. And I kind of always hold to that mindset of like, I've done 13 hours before. I could do that again. And turns out he was my shortest labor. It was like 3.5 hours, but he was my hardest labor because I was in the living room and then I sat in the birth tub, and the whole time I was like, I just didn't want to be there. I was like, this is horrible. I don't like this. I want this to be over with. Um, and I remember at one point I just started pushing and I was like, okay, Lord, I'm gonna do 5 more contractions and then I'm gonna have a baby. And it was like 40 minutes later and I still did not have a baby.
Mm.
And so yeah, long story short, he ended up coming out ROA, so he was a little, he was not facing the correct direction. Um, and it was just harder, as far as like actually mentally going through labor. There was nothing physically harder about it than any of my other births. Um, I just had a really, really, really bad mindset about it.
Mm.
And so after that, long story short, after that, my husband and I had kind of decided that we had needed a break, because he had been working so much. Just insanity. And I had herniated some discs in my back. And so I was like, okay, maybe we just need to take a break and, step back from the idea of like having another child right now. Um, and so we were like, okay, yeah, that's the right thing to do. And then a couple weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. Um,
That was
so
unexpected.
yes, yes, but really so grateful for our fourth. She's fantastic and love her to pieces. But I knew the biggest obstacle that I'd actually talked about with my midwife during my care was I was like, I cannot do that again to myself. I can't sabotage myself like that. It was miserable. And she had just told me, like, really encouraged me to just start working on, thankfulness, just
Mm.
trying to work on gratitude. Um, and I made up this really goofy song that we still sing to this day in my house when people have bad attitudes and we need to just, lighten the mood. I will even tell my children if we're out in public, I'm like, do I need to sing to you right now? Because I will. Um, and so we still to this day sing this song, but it was something that I just made up, you know, when I was pregnant with her, trying to work on that, even in the moments when it was really hard, because I had 21 months between my first two, 20 months, and then 19 months.
Mm.
So it was very, very stressful. But again, I felt like everything that, I really felt like my midwife had led me in that direction, which is something that I've never been in your care, Madon, but I've been around you in some births and with people. Um, and so I feel like I really, really appreciate the midwives that are working towards pointing their clients back to the Lord. I can't, that's the most important thing that I look for when I'm wanting a midwife. My first one was just a phenomenal spiritual leader for me and really got me to a point where I was like, man, you know, this is what it is to seek the Lord with everything that you have. And then, my second midwife was just really gracious and patient and understanding and encouraging in a really soft way that was also like nurturing. And at that time in my life, that's what I needed. With my first two, I kind of needed to be slapped around a little bit with reality. Um, and that's what that midwife did, and did it in the way of like, why are you worried about that? The Lord has that all taken care of. I remember telling her with my second, I was like, what am I going to do with my oldest? Like, we don't have family here. Who's he going to be with? She's like, well, the Lord's going to deal with that. I'm like, okay, you're right. Sure enough, he went and took a nap, and 2 hours later woke up and had a sister. And I was out of the pool, had placenta birth. I'm just holding his baby sister.
Nice.
So it all ended up working out. Yeah. And so with my third, I really needed her and, for that birth. And then with my fourth, just her really encouraging me to be like, this is what I feel like you need to work on. And I just was able to listen and take that. And I just really, really have an appreciation for you guys that do that and try to lead these women spiritually because it is such a huge journey. Motherhood, people kind of joke about like, you have, 3 kids, what's one more? You have 4 kids, what's one more? It's a lot. It's a lot. It's heavy for me spiritually because I'm like, I'm not just, raising these children. I'm raising them to hopefully become, mighty warriors for the kingdom. And oh my gosh, just even saying that, it's like a weight. You're like, oh man. So I really appreciated her with my fourth, and I really worked on, just being thankful and finding the joy in things and um having a lot of gratitude for what I did have. And actually her middle name is Joy because at the time we felt my husband, little side story, we could not figure out a middle name. And it's very stressful because I like to have the babies' names picked out before they're born. I like to call them that. I like to speak it over them. And we couldn't figure it out. And one day I got in the car and I've been listening for King and Country's album for a long time. And the song Joy came on and all my kids would sing and dance to it 24/7. And I got in the car and I was driving home from the store, which is like 2 minutes up the street. And it came on and I was like, oh my gosh, Joy, Joy. That's what I've been working on. That's what this baby has like brought into our life. So I like ran inside. I'm like, Joy, what about Joy? And he was like, I have been praying. I had her in December. And he had said that entire year he had been praying that I would find my joy again and that the Lord would
Oh,
restore joy to me. So it's one of those really
that's
cool
awesome.
things where it's just like I had no clue. Um, so her middle name is Joy, but during her birth, I remember it being so different in the sense of, not telling the Lord like, okay, I'm gonna do 5 more contractions and then I'm gonna have a baby. It was more of you know, okay, Lord, I can do this. You've provided my body the strength to do this, help me get through this. And then I would get to the peak of that contraction and then I would come down from it and I would just be like, thank you for that.
Mm.
And it was a million times better than that third birth. Um, but I'm so grateful for that because I really felt like that helped me to really try to instill that into my clients. Because I had only done a couple of births up until that point, and mainly for friends and family members. And it's easy to encourage them, but it's sometimes harder to because they know me and I know them, but it's sometimes a little bit harder to walk into a stranger's, life and encourage them to be able to be thankful and to get a hold of their mindset when they are in labor because it's just so important. It can make the world of difference. And I like to tell everybody in my birth education, it doesn't matter whether you're going in for a scheduled C-section, for a planned induction, if you're trying for a home birth, whatever, it doesn't matter. You have to get a handle on your mindset.
For sure. So this is something I've talked a lot about on the podcast, especially in the more recent podcasts. We've talked a whole lot about this and about taking every thought captive and bringing it into obedience and prayer,
Yeah,
about walking in truth
right.
and not lies. Taking that thought captive. Wait, is that a truth or is that a lie? If it's a lie, get
Right.
out of here. If it's the truth, I'm going to walk in that.
Hmm.
And how important that is. I mean, like we have so much power with our thoughts and our words. The power of life and death is in the tongue. And so thinking
Yes.
about that and just how that can change a whole situation or experience for you. Like I've experienced that as well. All of us have in some way, if we stop and think about it. But just the power of thankfulness and joy, and truly walking in that, and how that can completely change a
Hmm.
situation, even if it's like you said, even if you're walking into a C-section, and even if it's a situation that on the outside looks like this is not a great situation, the way in which we approach it, the perspective that we come from when we come to that situation makes such a huge change. And it not only changes in that moment, it changes our perceptive or our perception of that moment later. So when we talk about trauma,
Right.
so much on this podcast we've talked about trauma and the different things that have happened and the stuck mindsets that we've gotten into because of these things that maybe were out of our control, and how later, like our perception of that situation completely can change. So
Right.
let's go back to that birth, I believe was your third, that you really
Hmm.
were not in the right mindset. It doesn't start when labor begins. It starts
No.
way before then. And you
Yep.
mentioned as a provider, like walking alongside women and showing them, really coming alongside them and speaking life into them, and really, pointing them towards the Lord and in all things. That has to start from the very beginning of our relationship.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I agree 100%. And a lot of that I take my own responsibility in, which is another thing that I talk about in my birth class is communicating. With my midwife, I mean, I remember her sitting me down towards the end and looking at me and saying, I need you to tell me what your biggest fear is over this whole birth. She was like, because we need to talk through that. Because she said, if we're going to sit here and hold it in, it's going to happen. And I remember telling her my biggest fear was that um, that I would hemorrhage or I would tear too much to where I'd have to go to the hospital. And I was like, I just don't know what to do in that situation. Do you take the baby with you to the hospital, but you didn't have the baby at the hospital? I was like, I just don't want to be like ripped apart from my baby, because something happened to me, and sure enough, after I had him, they were concerned about me bleeding so much and hemorrhaging, and thankfully that we got a hold of that. Talk about the power of you know life and death is in the tongue. She looked at me and said, "You need to stop bleeding right now."
I love
And
it.
I was like, "Okay, I'm
Yep.
gonna stop bleeding right now." Like it
Yes.
was like, "All right, okay, that's what I'm gonna do." She told me to do it. She's speaking that over me. We're just gonna do it. Um, and so everything ended up really well. But then like you're saying from the beginning, I tell my clients, I'm like, it is not your job in labor to find the solution. It is your job as the woman that's laboring to tell the people what's going on. Um,
To
because with
communicate.
my second,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's why you have so many people to support you. With my second, I got stuck in a position where I just wasn't comfortable, but I just, I'm like, well, this is labor. It's not supposed to be comfortable.
Mhm.
And I also, my midwife was like, you're at an 8, and I got in the pool, and like 10 minutes later, I thought I was feeling her head. And I was like, there's no way. It's only been 10 minutes. So I was like, I just have to keep, having contractions. It was probably 20, 30 minutes later. I asked her, I was like, is this her head right here? She was like, yes. I'm like, man, I could have been pushing a long time ago.
Uh,
um, but it's just one of those things where like you need to communicate. And so once I told her, I was like, I am so uncomfortable. I don't like this. But I just couldn't think of how I did want to be.
do you
And so
feel
she said, this is what we're gonna do.
awesome? Good.
And
Good.
she
That
flipped
you spoke
she
up.
she got me in a good position and I had a baby two pushes later.
Nice. Do you feel
Yeah.
like a big contributing factor um to your third birth and to your feelings around that and everything that happened? Do you think like a huge part of that came from all the stress and anxiety you were having all throughout the pregnancy with everything, the feeling like chaos
Oh
kind of
yeah.
happening in your home?
And it started from the beginning. I I love I love my parents dearly. And they're fantastic, and our relationship is like the Lord has really, really worked on that, which is something that I've I've honestly, I mean, I have notebooks of prayers over just like asking the Lord to heal that, and He has. And I'm so thankful for that. But at the time, my sister was expecting her first child. We actually have my niece is 5 weeks older than my third.
Aw.
And so I'm big and pregnant at her birth. And I got to be there to support her. And 5 weeks later, I had a baby. And so I felt the stress that that was to my family. My mom and dad had a very hard time conceiving and actually lost multiple babies, one of which was lost 5 days after she was born.
Oh,
Um, she didn't have a pump to her heart, and they didn't do heart transplants back then. And so they've walked a really stressful, traumatic, ordeal in getting pregnant and having children. My mom went in to have her tubes tied, and they were like, "We can't do this operation today, ma'am. You're pregnant."
oh,
And that was with me, and they wanted more children. They just didn't think that it was possible. And so, like God, worked all that out for them. But I think it was very stressful for them. With me, it was like, you have a boy, you have a girl. Why are you doing this again? Like, why are you rolling the dice? Why are you taking a chance on the odds of it? And so I felt that. I felt a little bit selfish because my sister was having her first baby, and I wanted to be there for her and be with her. And um, not that I like asked to get pregnant. um, Meaning like at the same time as her. Like
right.
it just happened.
You made a
And
comment about the third. But I've heard this line of thinking before. That, oh no, now the odds are going to go up that something's going to go wrong. I had two really great births,
yeah,
and now this is the third one.
yeah,
So, I mean, my chances get worse and worse that something horrible is going to happen. Well, right there,
yeah.
that's a terrible mindset right away,
Yes.
assuming,
And
yeah, that things are
that's where
going to
I
go
was at.
wrong.
It was so bad. And that's where I was at. And I didn't tell anyone what I was thinking.
Mm.
I just like, to me, it was like, if I don't speak it out loud, it's not real, but it was festering inside me for forever. And so then, like you said, then you get into actually being in labor. And you're already there. I was already done with being pregnant. I had so much prodromal labor. Just side note, with my second, third, and fourth, I got to 7 or 8 centimeters dilated weeks before I had a baby.
Mm.
So I typically would sit there until I'd gone into labor, which is I'm so grateful that my body does that, because I'm here for that. But at the time, I had a horrible mindset on it. I was not in the right place for that. And
Mm.
I didn't communicate that to anyone, because I know, had I said something to my midwife or to my husband or to anyone around me, it could have changed a lot of that.
A lot of times what happens when we have fears like that and we hold them in, we let our mind really run away with us.
Oh yeah.
And and what happens is, so Madon has a thought that, ooh, that could go terribly wrong. And then Madon thinks again, you're right, that could go terribly wrong. Oh my goodness. And it could even be worse than that. And then, yeah, you're right, Madon. That's right. That could go awful, and then so
And then
I'm
next thing
I'm
you're
the one
attending
going
your
back
own
and forth.
funeral.
Exactly. Yes, but whenever
Yeah.
you speak these things out loud and you take them to somebody who is going to speak truth over you, then you can go to them. And then I found what's so great is because you can say those things out loud and they can look at you and be like, yes, I understand where that fear is coming from. However, and then they can help you talk it out. And one of the things, like I have tried to work with, especially with one of my children on that, because they have a tendency to do that as well. And to be like, okay, let's play worst case scenario. Let's play it out. Like
Hmm.
when you had the fear about bleeding, right? And being
Hmm.
separated from your baby. So if you bring
Yeah.
that up to your midwife, she's going to have that conversation with you. And she's going to be like, okay, this is what would happen. This is what we would do. We would not separate the two of you. We would make sure that baby stays with you, but baby may come in with another person so that they're not trying to admit the baby. Right. Or depending on
Right.
what the situation is. But if we play it out and then okay, these are the steps that are going to be taken. This is what's going to happen. We have maybe three possibilities of how it's going to go, and none of them are the worst case scenario that you had pictured in your mind this whole
Right.
time. And so that really helps to just, okay,
Yeah.
let's play it out. Let's just do that for your mind for just a moment. What would that look like? Guess what? That's not the truth. That's not really what's going to happen. This is what's really going to happen. And then you can come from a very different mindset and be able to really, speak into that and just that communication to be able to have that perspective. And, in your situation, you didn't know. Like knowledge is what you needed. You needed information and
Hmm.
knowledge about the situation. You didn't have those yet because you hadn't had those experiences. And so going to somebody who did have the knowledge, who did have the experience, then they could help you in that situation. So I think I keep thinking of Psalms 1:1, I think it is, and talk about seeking counsel of wise,
Wise. Yeah.
not yeah, and not ungodly, but instead wise and godly people, right? So you want to make sure that you're going to talk to somebody. What you don't want to do is you don't want to go find your friend who had this horrible traumatic
Oh
birth
gosh. Yeah.
and you've got these fears and you go ask her about it. Well, her poor thing, her perspective is gonna come from her trauma there. So she's probably going to then instead validate your worst fears and then tell you it might even could be worse than that because she's stuck in a
Oh yeah.
mindset already because of her trauma. So we do need to be wise about
Right.
who we're going to talk about these things and have the conversation, and then take that information and see how we can reframe the conversation. We can reframe our perception or our perspective in that situation or whatever it is. Let's talk about the opposite then. So we all have experienced and we all know what happens when we get into this loop of negative thinking, or really, I don't even like to just call it negative thinking. I would call it walking in lies, because what happens
Yeah.
is you're told a little lie. Um, it could be just that you're going to bleed out and be separated from your baby at this birth, right? That could be the lie, but people think that's a bigger one. Maybe it's just you're not going to be heard in this birth. Maybe that's the lie, right? Or
Hmm.
maybe you don't
Yeah.
have
Oh yeah.
enough to do this,
Oh
or
yeah.
you're not even going to be able to handle another child, right? So
Hmm.
maybe these little lies, and what happens is when we don't take that thought captive, when we don't renew our mind and in the truth in that moment, and we go with that, then everything else comes from that perspective. So the next thing I think is already going to come from the thought that, yes, I am not going to be able to handle this. Yes, I am not going to be able to do this well. Or whatever the thing is, I've already agreed with that. So I'm already
Right.
starting.
Yeah.
That's my starting point now this time. And then when another
Yeah.
lie
You.
comes, I'm just going with more and more. But whenever we stop and we take that thought captive and we line it up with the truth and be like, you know what? No, that is not who God says I am. I know that is not how this birth is supposed to go. I know that I am well taken care of. I know that I am well equipped to take care of all the children that the Lord has given me, and they are major blessings, and this is going to be a wonderful work for the kingdom, and I am looking forward to it, and I am thankful that I am in this position. And Lord, I'm thankful that you've placed this birth team around me, Lord. And I might say, Lord, ask me, or Lord, help me to converse with them well. Help me to use my words well and convey what I'm thinking and my thoughts, Lord, so I can really utilize this team that I have around me. And then that thankfulness, when you
Right.
start speaking thankfulness out loud, like you're talking about, and when you start walking in that joy, it changes everything. It changes your demeanor. It changes, I mean, even the way like you look, because you can't help but smile when you're like, Lord, I'm so thankful that you have
Yeah.
brought
Oh
me
yeah.
back to this place right now. Lord, I'm thankful that I am the one that gets to birth this baby. Lord, I'm thankful that I get to walk out this life with these precious little ones. Lord, I'm thankful that I have a little one in my arms to breastfeed, even though, Lord, I'm so tired and I really need sleep right now. I am so thankful. And I get to see this little joyful, peaceful baby on me. In those moments, it's so important to start. I mean,
Yeah. Oh
we're
yeah.
talking about taking the thoughts captive in our mind, but then I say, then let's speak the truth. So take those thoughts and speak the truth out of them. And when we start talking like that, it's infectious. And we start
Oh
completely
yeah.
changing that perspective and changing our perception of the situation.
Yeah. And I liked what you said about like breaking agreements with certain things, because I feel like a lot of times, a lot of things that we have come over us is because we've come into agreement with a lie, and that, that so quickly can be broken off. And that's another thing that something that I learned. Once I really started teaching my birth class, was I started, researching and learning, and I really started teaching and all that after I had my fourth. And so I um actually learned way back in high school that when you experience like anger, when anger is tripped off in your mind, um, it releases a hormone and a chemical that like has to be processed out of your brain. And it can take, up to 3 hours. So anger is, one that like, it has that effect on our brain chemically. Fear does not. Fear does not um, have to be something that I love that Ina May says in one of her TED Talks. She's like, fear is an emotion that does not have to be metabolized. So as soon as it comes on, it can go away just as quickly.
Hmm.
And I love that because I'm like, yeah, that's right. And so in my class, I talk about the cycle of fear and what does that look like? And it comes from, like you're saying, just that one thing. We go there, and then it has the effect of, we have a contraction, there's fear, and then there's increased pain. And, and then there's like essentially, oh, they're essentially like you have fear, increased pain, and then, you lose control of, of that process. And you've got tension, which is just going to bring on more fear, more pain, and you go in that loophole of it. And so just walking in the cycle of knowledge where you've got comfort and you have knowledge of what's going on, and it actually makes things go so much quicker and easier in labor and in birth, because you're not sitting there having to fight with yourself and your body against itself.
And all it takes is just stopping and be like, nope, that's not the truth. Let's say, what is the truth? The truth is that these contractions are bringing me closer to my baby. The truth is that
Right.
this will end, whatever the thing, might be that it is. And you can just stop right then and immediately start walking in the truth and not have to continue in that fear cycle.
Yeah. And so um I have in some of my births, and I encourage people in my birth class to, it's actually part of their homework because it's a 2-week series. So there's two classes that are a week apart, and in between, I make them, whether they think it's goofy or not, I make them come back with at least 3 affirmations that they like, that speak to them. Um, because it is so important, especially for first time moms who don't know what labor is. What is going to encourage you when things get really hard at the end? Is it someone telling you that you're doing a good job? Or is it somebody reminding you, hey, just take it one contraction at a time. Every contraction brings you closer to your baby. What is it that's going to speak to you? We had kind of a joke. I tell this to everyone, but we had a joke in my first, in the 10-week course that we took. It was me and my husband and another couple, and they were so funny. And there was a time where we would do icebreakers at the beginning of class, and it was, would you rather hear you're doing a great job or you're a rock star in labor? And I just started laughing because I was like, that is the goofiest thing I've ever heard. You're a rock star? I was like, I do not want anyone telling me that I'm a rock star when I'm in labor. That is not what I'm here for. And so we joked about it at that time. And then in the midst of pushing, I don't even remember saying it until I went back and watched my birth video. At one point, someone said, you're doing great. It was my doula, and she's the one that taught the class. She said, you're doing great. I was like, I know. I was like, I'm a rock star, and I couldn't believe that I had said it, but it was something so funny that, like, at the time, would I have ever thought that that would speak to me? Absolutely not. But it made for good comedy at the time, I guess. I was trying to crack some jokes with everyone, let them know I was doing good.
Yeah.
Um, so so things like that, I if someone had looked at me and been serious when I was in labor and been like, "You're a rock star," I would have been like, like, I'm good. So I like for them to have something that speaks to them, that is helpful to them. Same with my second, I put scriptures up on the wall that I wanted to be reminded of. That was really important to me. And another thing that I encourage all of the people that take my birth class to do is to write out a list of anything. And when you go to bed at night, that's typically when the brain starts to run wild, right? And so you're laying there and you start having this thought of, well, what if, so and so doesn't make it on time? What if my kids are here during my labor and the babysitter doesn't answer the phone and they don't get to come watch them? What happens if my water breaks when I'm out and about? Or
Mhm.
and it's those types of things that I really, really encourage. I think I just put it up in her baby box, but um for my fourth, I did that. Oh, sorry, are you there? There we
Yep.
go. Okay, but so for my fourth, I every night when I go to bed, if there was something that was bothering me or I was concerned about or something that I was like, hey, this is what I want at my labor, I had a little notepad that I wrote it down on. And then, just occasionally I would either pray over all of it or I would ask my husband, we'd be going to bed, I'd be like, hey, these are the things that I'm concerned about. Could you pray these things over our birth? And it was a whole list of things. And I kind of got to the point where I am not a planner. You had KK on your podcast, and she's fantastic. And I actually had the privilege of being at her first birth, and she's a planner. I mean, she had everything written out and all this stuff. And I was, I'm just like wildly fascinated at people like that because I kind of want to be like that, but I'm not. Um, and I'm very much just a go with the flow person. So that's honestly what I wrote down on my birth plan. Go with the flow. And it's just kind of who I am, but there were those certain things that I would pray over. As much as I'm a go with the flow, there were those certain little things that I had to take captive of, and I had to make sure that, I was not sitting there worried about these things. And one of my number one thing on my birth prayer list was that I just would pray like, Lord, whoever needs to be at my birth will make it here on time. Because I typically had quicker labors and I couldn't be worried about whether, my mom's going to get here or did I call, my midwife in time who was, an hour away or whatever. you know, Lord,
Yeah.
you're going to have to take care of that. I can't be concerned about that. And so I know that you have a perfect plan for all of that. Ironically, Jennifer Bell was the one that was at my birth that showed up to my doorstep with some homeopathics. And she's like, what'd you need this for? I'm like, well, I think I'm in labor. And she kind of looked in my house and it was Christmas time. And so, like I said, we had been listening to a lot of For King and Country. We had their Christmas concert that was on their like 1 hour special that was on YouTube. And it was keeping my children preoccupied while I was cleaning up the kitchen. And so we're a big music family. I had one kid, mind you, I have three kids that were, 4, 3, and 18 months old or 19 months old. So one was on the piano. One of them had a guitar out and one of them had a drum set out and they were singing and it was loud and chaotic. Um, and I thrive in that. And so she kind of looked in my house and she was like, is there another adult here? I was like, no, it's just me. She's like, okay, I'm going to come in and do your dishes. And little did I know, if had somebody said on that birth prayer list, you need to pray that Jennifer Bell will be at your birth, I would have been like, no, that's not who's supposed to be here. I never would have imagined she would be the one. Not only was she the first one there, she was the one that convinced me to call my husband. She was the one that convinced me to call my midwife, which I mean, had I not, I think my husband was here for all of, 45 minutes before I had a baby. And the midwife got here 30 minutes before I had the baby. So it was one of those things where it was like her purpose at my birth, as goofy as it was she really encouraged me to call people when I needed to call them. And so that was my number one, was that the people that needed to be here would be here. My number two was that I would call everyone in time for them to get here.
Mm.
I mean, So incredible things like that, that I feel like, you know, for my third experience, holding all of that in, typically I just would have laid there and festered on all those things all night long. And like you said, let it just go and go. So with my fourth, I feel like I had a much better hold of that, and it really made a world of difference, because I just kind of gave all that to the Lord and was like, you know that these are my concerns. I need you to be the one, to give me peace over this, and to speak the truth through your word to me about these things. Um, and and something that he really did in that time that I'm so grateful for was, we were we had read a couple of, my husband's really great about reading, the Bible to the kids at night. And I just kept overhearing him reading, like, some stories here and there, and I would just get glimpses of it. But every time I would get the glimpses of it, it was like someone's doing something in fear, and what do they do with that fear? So I feel like we live in this world where it's like, we're just not supposed to have fear. Don't fear about it. Which, yeah, we're not supposed to live in fear. Absolutely. We don't have to have that fear. But what the theme that kept coming up in everything that I kept hearing him read from the Bible was, what were the people doing with that fear? Were they taking it, and instead of going into the promised land that the Lord had given them, they sat back in fear, and there was a consequence for that?
Yeah.
Or did they take it to God, and did he do things that he was able to do, that only he was able to do? So for me, that was a big revelation of like, okay, it's not that I'm doing bad, or that I'm not a good enough believer or whatever, because I'm having fear or experiencing fear. It was, what am I doing with it?
That's a great point. I actually, I've mentioned him on the podcast a few times before, but I don't know if you've ever heard of Jamie Winship, Sammie, but
I'm
I
gonna write that down.
I have been reading his book Living Fearlessly, which is an amazing book. I highly recommend it. And
Oh, stop. Look, I literally just pulled it out of my nightstand, and it's on my nightstand.
seriously,
That's insane.
that's
Yes.
amazing. All right, Lord,
Yes.
thank you so much. It's an
Yeah.
amazing book. So good. And if you can go to YouTube or go to your podcast app, look up anything by Jamie Winship, and it's so wonderful. And he points to this fear. He talks about this, and he's like, fear helps lead us in the right direction if we're paying
Yes.
attention. Like, yes, we are
Because
not
he was a
supposed to.
cop, correct?
Was. Yes, he
Okay.
was.
Okay.
And has done a lot of amazing things for the Lord, working in Muslim countries, taking his family over there, and just there's so many amazing stories, and just listening to how the Lord speaks in this situation, and how he speaks directly to us in those situations, and how he teaches so much about, like, so when we have fear, okay, Lord, what do you want me to know in this situation? Okay, so then,
Yes.
and then after that, then, okay, so in light of that, what should I do in this situation? Right? So it's different than we're just like, oh, just, lead me, just tell me what to do, tell me what to do. Well, hold on a second. I need to see some things. I need to know some things that's happening. And that fear, as he would say, that fear can direct us to the
Hmm.
right place. So yes,
Right.
we're not supposed to stay in fear. Like, we're not living in fear. But when we do feel fear come in from, depending, I mean, it could be like, I mean, just a simple example, like, I'm afraid that, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something wild. Like, I'm on a hike, and, a coyote, I hear a coyote in the distance. Okay, yes, that might cause some fear in me for a moment. And, well, what am I going to do with that? Well, then I'm going to choose to make a better decision about where I'm going on that trip. Or maybe I'm going to get my weapon out, or whatever I got, to prepare
Right.
myself for what's to come. So was that fear a bad thing? No, it actually alerted me to a situation so that then I could act out appropriately from that situation. So I love that he talks about that, and that you said that exact same thing, that fear is not, that fear itself is necessarily bad. And he calls it confession, because that's what scripture says, but really what confession is truth telling. It's not, I'm so
Hmm.
sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, and all that. That's not what it is. Like when somebody says that they, okay, confess. Well, I'm not telling them to tell me I'm so sorry I did something. I want to hear what happened. I want to know what happened in that situation. What was the scenario? Who did what, right? And so when we take like you pointed out about the notebook, I love that. In fact, I happen to have this right beside me. I'll do a little plug. This is actually from Ashley King's. She has lots of amazing things for mamas and birth workers, and this is one of her journals. And I actually it's just got lined pages, and it's beautiful because it's got floral and stuff. I
Oh
actually
yeah.
hand these out to each of my mamas when they first come into my care, because and I
Oh,
tell them,
that's
okay,
awesome.
this is your mama journal. It's not necessarily like your regular journal where you're going to write all kinds of other things down. It's one that you're going to keep by your bedside. And it's going to be for those moments when you're in the middle of the night and you can't
Hmm.
sleep and you need to write things down. So say those fears come upon you. Okay, so truth tell. I'm terrified I'm going to die in labor. Okay, write it down.
Yeah.
Tell it. Tell the Lord, Lord, I'm
Golly.
terrified I'm going to die in labor. That's confession. That's truth telling. Okay. And
Hmm.
then what do? We're like, okay, Lord, tell me what the truth is. What's the truth in this situation? The truth is that is highly unlikely. And the truth is, I've already told you that I've got your back and I'm taking care of you in this situation, right? And
Right. Hmm.
whatever the case might be. So you write it down, you take it to the Lord, and then you listen to what he has for you in that situation. And that's just that we walk from that, and then that's an amazing walk with the Lord when you're writing down those confessions, or you're telling him those confessions of fear, of anxiety, whatever the thing might be. You lay it out, let him know, hey, that's
Yeah.
nothing
Oh
wrong
yeah.
with telling him, Lord, I'm afraid in this situation. I'm afraid you don't got my back. Lord, I'm afraid we're not going to be able to afford to pay for another baby. Lord, I'm afraid my husband's
Yeah.
going to
I
lose his
mean,
job any moment, those types of things. Lay it out. Tell him what the fear is. And then you come from this place of honesty with him, and then he can speak into that, and he can remind you, hey, I said I would not leave you an orphan, that you are my child. I am going to take care of you. And he can
hmm
speak, the truth into us after we have poured out those lies and those fears and
and
anxieties.
yeah, and that goes right back to what I was saying about, but you have to communicate, and so like
Yeah.
when I'm telling these moms, it's not up to you to provide the solution for the problem. It is up to you to trust the birth team that you've chosen to speak that truth into you when you're in labor and you're having those fears. Or, even just as simple as when you're in labor and you're concerned about something. Hey, I'm feeling this now, and I was not feeling that earlier. Is that wrong? Is something wrong? And then that person, whoever's around you, your midwife, your doula, even a family friend or whatever is there to encourage you, that's been through birth before, able to say, no, that's completely normal. That's
Yeah.
what birth is. That means you're making progress. That's a good thing. But because we like I said, I feel like we've been conditioned or taught or trained um not want fear because we feel like it's a failing part
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
that. It's means you're failing, and that's not the case at all. And sometimes it's great when you're in a long labor and you're kind of sitting there wondering, well, what are we going to do next type thing, and you've got a mom that looks at you and is like, I'm like, my contractions are so much lower, and I'm feeling it in my back, and like I'm almost feeling it like in my bottom, and you're like, oh yeah, that's great, we're making progress, like we're doing good type thing, like we're not, and you can explain that and tell that to them, and then it's easier for them to allow those contractions to wash over them, and for them to accept that, and for their body to make better progress. And so it goes back to the fact of you're you have to choose the right birth team. You have to be educated, because it could even just be that you just want your midwife and your spouse there. That's great. Tell those things, open up to them, tell them, hey, these are some things that I'm praying about. These are some things that I'm nervous about. Is there any way that you guys could reassure me in labor that, that these things aren't happening to me, because it's so important to be vocal about what you are experiencing in order for the truth to come in, because when you're in labor, it's really difficult to ration with yourself, like to,
Mhm.
you know, to be in the right headspace. That's why it's so important that you have people around you that can do that for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that fear that we talked about, like that, when you don't talk about it, when you don't either, write it down and take it to the Lord, or when you don't talk about it with your birth team or your spouse, your midwife, whoever's going, what's happening, you instead are bottling up and storing it, and almost like you're bound by it. And that makes
Hmm.
everything tense and bound. And in labor, we know how important it is that we are not tense and bound up. And
Yes.
by
Yeah.
just having that conversation, by just voicing those things, then you're able to release it, and then you're able to walk in the truth, because then the truth can come in and you can talk about what that is. And so then really you're able to walk in freedom instead of being bound up in
Right.
fears or anxieties or whatever it is. And sometimes it's, condemnation or shame or whatever the thing might be. I mean, that comes in all of us every day. And I know we're really focusing on birth right now. But this comes into play daily. All of us
Yes. Oh yeah.
have lies that have come up, fears, anxieties, things that come up throughout the day, all the time. And taking those things captive, and when I say like cast them out, like, okay, speak that thing out and let's let truth reign instead. And it's so powerful, and it's a daily thing. And so I encourage everybody, not just mamas, to keep, this notebook with them, but
Right. Yeah.
every person keep a notebook. This is my personal one here that was given to me by a friend. Like, I keep this one by my bedside, and I try to take it with me places when I need, and so I can jot those things down when I'm not with somebody who I could just speak those things to. And I'm by myself, okay, I'm
Hmm.
going to jot them down. I'm talking to the Lord about them. And I'm like, okay, Lord, I'm handing these things over to you. And instead, I want you to saturate me with your truth, because that's
Right.
what I want to walk in. And I know that there's freedom when we walk in the truth, because we were told that the Holy Spirit is the one that guides us into all truth. And we were given freedom through the Lord, and He's given us His Holy Spirit so we can walk completely, not bound by anything, because that is a lie, right? That we're bound by anything. Instead, we get to walk in freedom now. And so it's so wonderful when you get to do that. And I really want to encourage everybody, like, even if you're not pregnant right now or you're not in the birth world and you're listening, like, this is for all of us. This is for every situation of
Right.
our life. This is for every day that we don't let fear bind us. We cast it out instead, and we write it down. We talk to people, whoever we need to, and instead we walk in the truth and we saturate ourselves with the truth. And then that's what we speak. We speak the
Right.
truth out, and we get to walk in that. And you talked so much in the beginning about thankfulness and joy with that fourth birth of yours. Like, that is just, I love it. Like, just being
Yeah. Oh
saturated
yeah.
in that joy, and walking that out, that your tone changes, your voice changes, that thankfulness. It's really hard to keep saying, man, I'm so thankful for this. I'm so thankful for my children. I'm so thankful for my husband. I'm thankful for this book that I just read, Lord. And when you start talking like that, I mean, you have to, it changes your whole demeanor. It changes your whole body.
Hmm.
And even scientifically, if you study,
Yes.
changes our cellular structure when we walk in thankfulness and joy and
Yep.
truth. It changes our cellular structure. Isn't that a little bit mind blowing? I mean, like, it's just
Yeah. Oh
that
yeah.
important.
Someone had mentioned, I had done there's a thing here in Abilene called Worship and Workout. And I had done it, and they just went over, this was just recently at, in November, they were doing, thankfulness for Thanksgiving. And they went over this whole list of, um, just the actual differences that people experience when they walk in joy, when they walk in thankfulness, and in gratitude. And it it's not, it's not really mind blowing to think that. It's just, I feel like I need to be reminded that all the time. It's like, I know these things. Why are we so such forgetful people? Um, and so today I was kind of looking up and talking about this. I was like, I wonder if I could find that. Well, I found something else that was talking about how just the synapses of our brain, when you have a thought, they fire off. And then the longer you spend in that thought, the more it reaches out, the more cells that it touches, the more that it affects. And so, yeah, everything in life, any sort of, trauma or anything, you've got to stop it there so it doesn't reach all the cells and take over your mind. And I'll just give you a small little example is last year around this time, Ezra got a baseball right to the eye.
Mm.
Um, and we ended up having to go into the emergency room. He had broken his orbital bone. They weren't sure if he was going to have vision back. It was, it was a whole nightmare. And it was very scary at the time. And I just remember being so grateful because as a mom, I kind of, do play worst case scenario. But when I was sitting in the emergency room with my husband, I was like, well, they want to do a CT scan. They want to do this, they want to check on him. And his at the time his pupil was oval instead of round, which is not good.
Mhm.
And my husband just kept looking at me every time I would say something to him. He'd be like, he's okay. I know he's okay. And I kept having to be reminded of that. Okay, yeah, you're right. He's okay. The Lord's going to take care of us. He's going to take care of him. And then a couple minutes later, it was the same thing. Well, what about this? What about that? What if this is happening? He's okay. He's going to be okay. The Lord's going to take care of him and heal him, and he's going to be perfectly whole. Okay, you're right. So it was that constant need for reminder in those moments, um, which is everyday life. Anytime you are involved in something crazy or hectic. Um, but but for me, it started with that birth, and
Yeah.
then from there, it just spiraled out into, you know, okay, I wanted to help people have a great experience giving birth. And if I can help do that by, teaching education so that way they are better prepared. I mean, my goodness, I wish everyone would take a birth class, even if you're going in to be induced, if you want an epidural, if you want a C-section, I don't care. I wish everyone would do it because it's so important and people don't realize it until they're, sitting in the hospital and it's like, well, I don't know anything that they're telling me. And then it does seem scary. Oh, hey, you had some meconium when your water broke. Oh my gosh, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Um, it's scary, and then you can get trapped in that. But when you have the knowledge, it's so much easier to take those thoughts captive, and to work through that. And I was gonna say I had one client that, well, I had two that really kind of like reaffirmed somebody had been like praying over me, which um was that I would help guide people like towards the Lord in their births. Um, and so I had one client, which was KK, whenever she had been told that she was, had a breech baby and we had to go to the hospital. She had told me after at my postpartum visit, she had said, "You were so right." She said, "My contractions before she told me that I was going to have to go to the hospital, I felt like they were nothing. Like I was rocking it. I could do great." And she really was. I mean, you could tell she was just
Yeah.
riding the waves and everything was great. And then once she was told that we had to go to the hospital, the contractions were the same. They were the same contractions, but they were so much harder. They were so much harder. Um, and so you do the best that you can to help somebody, walk them through that and to get through that fear, which she did a great job of. And then I had another mom who, in the panic of labor and getting, we ended up transferring to the hospital. Once we got to the hospital, she looked at me and she was like, "Am I still going to be able to have a baby?" You know, and it was goofy, looking back at it now, I laugh about it. But at the time, I remember being so thankful to sit there with her and be like, yes, your body is still going to have a baby and it's still going to be wonderful and beautiful. And, this is just the process to get there. Um, and afterwards she had told me, she was like, I don't know, what I would have done had you not been there to reassure me that it was still, everything was still okay.
Yeah.
And I remember, specifically telling her, like, the Lord did not choose you to be this child's mother and put you here and then forgot about you and left you.
Right. Right.
The Lord did not choose you and then leave you and forget you. He is still here with you. And this is his job to walk you through this. We're just going to continue to seek him and what it is that he has for you in this.
Yeah.
So I'm really grateful to get to be a part of it, to get to, I don't get to do a whole lot of the doula work just because of, I have young kids and stuff, but the education part of it, I wish that, so many more people would take a hold of that and grasp onto the truth, because I feel like the generations coming up are finding more and more of it. But I know for me, I grew up in what birth was what I saw on TV shows, which was people screaming, and it was horrifying and terrible. And it was always an emergency. And I get to have an experience like that, where it's that frantic and chaotic and the screaming and all that stuff. It's just not true. That's not the truth. Um,
Yeah.
and so I've just been really grateful to be able to like help kind of bring that into other people's lives and change their perspective on it a little bit. And one more thing I did want to say before, I'm sure you have something to say, Madonna, you have so much wisdom. But um I had a friend that was a little going back and forth on whether she wanted her daughter, who was, I can't remember if she was like 7 at the time or 8. She had asked to be at her home birth. And she's like, I don't know. I don't want to scare her. I don't want her to be afraid. I don't want her to be in a position where she's afraid and she wants me to explain to her and I can't. Um, and I just kind of told her, I'm like, well, all of us know that she wants to be there. If she has questions or if she feels nervous or scared, we can walk her through that. Or if she's just like, this isn't really for me, she can always go to her room. But my biggest thing is that she doesn't know what birth is, but she also doesn't know what birth isn't. And so how beautiful is that for you as a mom to get to show her what it is, and to be able to teach that to her instead of letting, society and the world teach us that it's scary and frightening and horrible.
Yeah.
And so that was, and she was there and it was amazing. And, the moment the baby was born, like the placenta was still like inside the mom. And she was like, okay, I'm ready to hold the baby. And we're like, not yet, not yet. But it wasn't scary to her at all. And so
Yeah.
what a privilege that it is for her to have that now.
Yeah. I get to change her perspective. Um,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
yeah. And so then she's going to, every time like birth is talked about, in the future for her, she's going to come from that experience. And that's how she's going to
Hmm.
see it instead of, all the other things. So yeah, that's a great experience.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, a few things I was thinking about earlier, when you were talking, specifically about how we have to be reminded, and how often, we go to the word, we go to scriptures, to be reminded, but honestly, like we are intended to live in community with each other. That is
Right.
absolutely how we are intended to live. We're not intended to be on our own in an island, by ourselves. We are intended to be living in community with each other. And that is part of living in community with each other, to building each other up. And when somebody is grieving or hurt, then we come in and we lift each other up. And when somebody, is struggling, has fear, just even the small example you gave it with you and your husband, like that is community there. That is you two.
Hmm.
That is one building up the other one and professing truth over the situation, to them. And so that's exactly then what we are going to be doing, for each other. And that's what we get to do. And that's why I love walking, with women, and not just in the birth world, but in all aspects of life and getting to walk in this community where we get to, remind each other of what the truth is and encourage each other. And, sometimes we grieve with each other and, we might cry with each other about situations, but we get to help walk each other in the truth, and we get to help, like keep, maybe today's my day and I'm struggling, to walk in the truth today. There's some things that have got me, and you can remind me. And I think you should always like surround yourself with people who are willing to speak truth into you and to pray for you and to walk this out with each other. Because that's our community. That's some people call it, building your creating your village, but that's what we do for each other. That's what we need to do for each other. And that's how we all learn and grow and get to walk this kingdom walk together.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it's like I said, it's something that, it's something that's so beautiful, like in talking about, but then like another thing to get to experience it. Um,
Yeah.
and so I like to encourage people to go seek out. I've talked about it so many times because go seek out like wise women who have done this before. Um, for me, when I was having my oldest and I had decided to have a home birth, it was, you know, why are you doing that? This is a horrible idea. People don't do this for a reason. There's no way you're going to be able to make it through that. Um, and I didn't really have many people who had good experiences in that realm, except for my mother-in-law. And so, having her be able to provide for me the security and the truth at that moment that I needed was really great and really powerful. And then since then, I feel like it has encouraged me to build a community around me for what I have needed when I've needed it in my life. Like you're saying, for people to speak truth to me when I've needed it. And I'm so grateful for that. So something that also, when you had said that, made me think. I listened to a guy one time that was saying, like, God is not 100% truth or 50% truth and 50% grace. He's 100% truth and 100% grace. So when you're offering somebody truth, there's grace behind that. And when you're offering somebody grace, you're giving them the truth. And so finding, the people that are willing to do that for you, it is, like you're saying, so important.
Yeah.
Just life in general. And I have felt that with 100% with my husband, just throughout our entire marriage. There have been moments where I'm like, freaking out, and he's over here like, I remember one time him looking at me and being like, is God still God? Yes, he is. Okay, well, then this is what he says, and he's going to take care of us in that. And then there have been moments where I've had to do that for him too. And it's like
Yep.
you're saying, it's
That's what you
that
do.
community where you're always like, we really haven't had a moment where it's been both of us at the same time. So we've always had someone there to help remind us of that.
Yep. Yep. That's great. Yeah. Well, I think definitely a takeaway is just reminding, to build a community around yourself of people who speak the truth in love
Hmm.
and know what the truth is. Like really seek out,
Yes.
what is the truth? Who am I truly? Who does God say that I am? Does he always love me? Will he ever leave me an orphan? Am I intended to walk in freedom in the kingdom now? Different questions like that, like seek them out, seek the truth, and then, recognize when you hear a lie and confess, write it down, take it to the Lord, and then ask him, okay, what's the truth in this matter, and walk in it. So we just want to encourage everybody listening today, like, that's our heart to help you to learn to walk in the truth. And in whatever situation, if you are pregnant right now and preparing for birth, or if you're in the postpartum right now and you're like listening in the middle of the night while you're nursing your baby, or, maybe
Yes.
you have little ones that are not little anymore and they're leaving the nest and you've got a new season coming up and you're trying to figure out exactly who you are now and what's going on, with your life. And in any situation like that, it's the same. Like we come to the Lord in those situations, and we just can confess, what's the truth, Lord? What am I afraid of? What's going on? And Lord, you show me what I need to hear, what I need to know, what the truth is in this situation, and let me walk out of that truth. So
Yes. And that was actually the last thing that I had written down on my notes was it doesn't stop at birth.
oh, so true.
Um, it's something that I learned. It was a hard lesson that I learned the hard way. I feel like I'm a very optimistic person by nature. And so to have had that last birth, the third birth that I had had, was like a rude awakening, more so for me, because it was like, man, I really let myself get away from me. Um, but then it didn't stop there. It continued. I had the better birth experience, but then shortly after that, I was dealing with a newborn that was nursing. And then my third born really loved to take his diapers off all the time and play in, whatever mess he had made in his diaper. And like it was even in those moments there of like stopping myself and saying, this is not miserable. I take joy in being able to take care of my children, and things like that. Because when you do stop and you say, oh, this is horrible, it's terrible, it is that it becomes what you speak over it. And
Our
so
words are
I
so
learned,
powerful.
yes. And so I realized, like, oh man, I've got to get a better hold of that just in my life in general at that moment. And I do, so I wanted to say it doesn't stop there. It keeps going because breastfeeding is really hard sometimes for some people. Um, and so speaking truth over yourself there, I was created to do this. I'm nourishing my baby. It's a lesson that I'm so thankful that God showed me early on, that really honestly kind of transformed my life and my outlook on life and where I was headed.
Yeah. Yeah, it will change it completely. And you'll walk with a new perspective. And everything we do comes out of our perspective. And so when you change that
Mhm.
perspective and you're choosing to walk in the truth instead of lies, and you're choosing to walk in freedom instead of fear, and you're choosing to really, just walk in a way that you were created to walk, then it makes
Mhm.
everything so different. It just brings a lightness to your life and a joy that really is you can't find anywhere else. And so, yeah, it
Yeah.
absolutely changes everything. So, thank you so much, Sammie, for coming on the podcast today,
Yeah.
sharing. Really enjoyed it, and I know the listeners are going to get a lot from it, and I just really want to thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Madon. Like I said, I really enjoy getting to listen to your podcast and talking to you. And I'm really grateful for what you do and the work that you do. And I hope that, you really know that is that how thankful I am for what you do.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm thankful he's called me to do it. Thank you for listening. May you be encouraged and strengthened by what you've heard today. Remember, you are dearly loved by your Creator, so be who He created you to be. May you go in peace, friends. Till next time, Shalom.